Hello, everyone. Welcome to Latter-day Struggles. This is your host, Valerie. So excited to have you back here with me again. Bryson Ensign, how are you, my friend?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for being here. For all of you who are joining us for the first time, there's probably not that many of you who are joining us for the first time, but just in case you are, we are a podcast that helps people who are on a faith expansion experience in or around the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And we tackle all sorts of different kinds of topics connected to the spiritual experience of someone in this faith tradition. And there is an interesting demographic that I think probably doesn't get enough TLC here on the Latter-day Struggles podcast. A lot of times there are parents who have raised devout children because they themselves were devout. And then something happens. They start growing, they start expanding their ideas, sometimes having doubts, becoming more complex thinkers, and they start down the path of some sort of a faith expansion journey that feels like a faith crisis in the beginning. And all the while this is happening, sometimes their children come of age to go on missions. And this feels really, really complicated because on the one hand, we want to support our children. For many of us, I speak firsthand on this. I have spoken of my mission for my whole parenting life. And we're called upon to do some very complex things as parents, supporting our children as they are trying to navigate their own faith journey while having our own somewhat more complicated faith journey. And for this reason, when I learned about Bryson Ensign and his Latter-day Missionaries program, I was so excited to have him here on the Latter-day Struggles podcast because he has created, as a complete labor of love, some resources for missionaries in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from a perspective of a faith expanding person. And this is a resource for missionaries before, during, after, for their families. It's just an amazing, amazing resource. And we talked about this, kind of did an overview last episode. And today we're going to jump into one of the, I believe it's 12 chapters, and go deep into it so you have a little taste of what this is. And just so you kind of know that this is here for you, because I think this is a resource that is filling a gaping hole. It's filling a gap that is desperately needed here for us to support ourselves as parents, to support our missionaries, and to support anyone who is connected to the mission experience that many people have in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So first and foremost, Bryson, what say you to kind of add to that?
Yeah, as a mental health specialist, as a psychiatrist, I've thought for years, how can we help the missionaries improve their mental health? How can we better prepare them before their missions? How can we better support them on their missions and when they come home? And how can we support the families? Missions are tough at baseline, but then you add anxiety, you add depression, you add navigating complex relationships with your parents or your family members or your mission leaders and hard companions, and it just escalates in complexity and difficulty. And so I've been thinking about for years, how can we help this population of individuals learn how to thrive before, during, and after their missionary service and have a life worth living? Yeah. And so that's kind of how Latter-day Missionaries was born, is in this wrestle and trying to figure out how to provide these resources. And so like we talked about in our last podcast episode, I created what I call the Mental Health Training Center. So this is specifically for preparing missionaries, kind of a mental health 101 course that they can take, specifically targeting those preparing missionaries. So just as a brief overview, lesson 1 is called Stress Less, 20 tools to navigate stress on your mission. So we talk about different ways to do that. The second lesson is about homesickness and how to navigate that, and tools to be healthy and apply what you're learning to navigate homesickness in that way. Lesson 3 is about dealing with difficult companions. Lessons 4 and 5 are about the language of emotions, so learning how to navigate comparison, cognitive dissonance, and shame. I have a lesson on learning how to navigate rejection in healthy ways, because boy, do missionaries get rejected a lot. And it is super difficult on the mental health of missionaries. So learning how to navigate that with a growth mindset rather than a closed one. And then I have a couple lessons targeting the most common mental health conditions that missionaries face. I mentioned this last time, but I did some polls and researched some return missionary group populations at BYU. And based on the surveys, about 34% of missionaries struggled with depression or depressive symptoms, 30% struggled with anxiety or anxiety symptoms, and then 14% struggled with OCD and scrupulosity. And so those lessons are an introduction to recognize the symptoms of those conditions, and then how do you respond and what do you do with it when you do, or if you do develop those on your mission. And then the 12th lesson is kind of a high yield summary, go forth and be awesome into the mission field type lesson. So that's an overview of the Mental Health Training Center available for preparing missionaries. It's designed to be taken in the weeks to months before missionary service. There's 12 lessons or chapters. Each one has a video, training video or lesson, and then there's some companion resources like workbooks, and I have a cookbook for healthy eating. I have 4 months of workout routines to help missionaries be healthy, some mindfulness and breathing exercises, and just a wide variety of resources that missionaries can upload to their Google Drives and take them with them. So when they are struggling with stress, they can open that file and look at the 20 tools to stress less. Or when they are struggling with their companions, they can look up a resource that asks about how to ask open-ended questions and build a solid relationship with someone that you're not getting along with very well. And so the goal is to, before their mission, expose them to this content, help them start thinking about it, and then provide the resources that they have on their mission. So when they do struggle, they're not struggling alone.
It's a treasure trove, y'all. It's a treasure trove of resources for a vulnerable population. And what I mean by vulnerable, I'm thinking about a couple of different things. For one thing, it's such a huge adjustment, and also it's at a vulnerable age. And so I think oftentimes because of the age change, how we're kind of lowering and lowering the ages over the last couple of, I guess, I don't know if it's decade or more, some of these kids have never lived away from their family, their homes, their normal support systems, and even their normal and healthy coping strategies. And so there's like layers of vulnerability that I think can be mitigated and turn this into sort of a hero or a heroine's journey, which for some missionaries it can certainly be. For myself, it was. But also, I think there are sort of unnecessary stressors that emerge simply because missionaries don't necessarily have access or education around very normal things that can be happening in this big, important, kind of like high. The change is big, the environment is different. There's just a lot going on. And those numbers are high. The depression and anxiety numbers are very high. 1 in 3, approximately, on both of your surveys, if I'm not mistaken. And that's a lot. That's a big number. And I think there are some missionaries, some individuals who, definitely bring with them some propensities towards these, and that's okay. This resource can help them for sure. And also, I dare say there are probably some missionaries that maybe don't necessarily come with histories of anxiety and depression, that experience these for the first time and have, or experience them at a higher level than they are accustomed to, than sort of the everyday, vicissitudes of life. And they have no idea what's going on. They don't know what it means. They don't know what to do. And in some cases, I think they suffer unnecessarily for lack of education and for lack of resources. And so before we jump into this one particular topic that Bryson and I chose to focus on, I just want to just endorse this resource, like with all my heart. uh, as a return missionary, as a mother of a missionary right now, it's just inspired. It's so good for our missionaries. And I guess maybe now is as good a time of any, Bryson. You had just mentioned before we hit the play or the record button, that there's another big population that this is also for, that you are doing some new developmental work for, and it may be actually a larger population of listeners than even the missionaries themselves. So say a little bit about that, if you would, before we jump into the specifics of this one chapter.
Yeah, so I talk a lot with parents as missionaries are out around the world, and parents are like, what do I do about this? How do I help my missionary with that? My missionary is struggling with X, depression, anxiety, or they're having companionship issues. What can I do? How can I help them? I'm miles or oceans away, and I feel hopeless, and I feel helpless, and I feel vulnerable. And I've thought a lot about how can I help the parents of missionaries. So I created a free monthly email that teaches skills that parents can sign up for, to how to validate a missionary without judging them, or how to sit with a missionary in their pain without trying to fix it. And all these different tools, psychological tools to help parents be a supportive, steady point for a missionary in this chaotic missionary environment. And so I created that and a few other things, but most recently it came to me that parents are starving for these resources. There's just not a lot out there. We have Sunday school, we have Relief Society, where you can people ask, "Oh, how's your missionary?" And you want to say, "Oh, they're doing great," but we don't often talk about how they're struggling. And there's not a community around parents that can have a safe space to talk about the struggles, and as a community discuss the hard things and ways to navigate the complexities. And so I created this course I call Good Parents, Hard Calls. So it is focused on helping parents navigate the difficult mission call, but also to navigate the weekly phone call. And so the way we respond to missionaries can impact how the missionaries respond to us. We know this. And often, as concerned parents, we start asking questions after questions, and we want to know the details. And often, out of good intent, our responses kind of shut the missionary down. And my goal in Good Parents, Hard Calls is to give parents the tools and the resources to have these conversations, these difficult conversations, in healthy ways. So I err on the side of practicality. So I'm providing like scripts where like a missionary calls their mom or dad and say, "Hey, I'm struggling with anxiety. What can I do?" And I have some practical tools and scripts that parents can use as a foundation, as the training wheels, as they learn how to have healthy conversations, to navigate and to explore and to validate and sit with. So I'm super excited about this resource for parents of missionaries and also the community. That's a huge aspect. So part of the platform is this message board where parents can say, "Hey, my missionary shared this with me. I'm just really struggling." So other parents can validate and say, "Hey, I'm here for you. I see you. We're in this together." And then they can also ask for advice. They can say, "Hey, my missionary is struggling with this. How have you navigated this with your missionary?" And so my goal with this Good Parent Hard Calls community is to just provide a safe space where parents can feel open about talking about the good and the hard, and to just start the conversations where we can, from the ground up, create a culture of good mental health from the parents, to be steady parents, to help our missionaries be steady missionaries.
I love that so much. I want to reiterate something that impressed me as I was going through this content for the first time, and I mentioned it a little bit in our last episode, that this resource is such a gift because it really does seem to meet the needs of parents on the entire spectrum of the Latter-day Saint, faith experience. Whether you are more of a devout believer, or if you are deeper into sort of a more, a faith expansion experience, and you are having a different some different ideas, some different thoughts, or you're defining your belief system in a less traditional way, it can serve you as well to help you know how to negotiate some of these sort of situations that your missionary is going to be experiencing, regardless of what your experience as a parent is. Okay, so having said that, though, I do have a question for you, Bryson. If you are a parent with a missionary, on the one hand, say, for example, your missionary has is struggling with a companion. Uh, that kind of interaction between a parent and a child is going to be probably, like, in other words, the needs of the parent in that moment are probably going to be similar no matter where the parent themselves is on the faith spectrum. Okay. However, I'm wondering if your resources for parents, do they address issues that some parents might have as they're talking to their child who's a missionary, who may not necessarily be addressing like mental health issues of their own, but that bring up a lot of anxiety in the parent around the influence that an ultra conservative mission is having on their child. And the reason why I ask that is because that is a question that is brought to me frequently. What are your thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
that's an excellent question. I am a firm believer in the concept of steady parenting. So, as we parent from our fears, our insecurities, our inadequacies, it bleeds into the child and it causes them to have fears, inadequacies, and doubts and concerns. And so, in Good Parents Hard Calls, I really focusing on becoming stable yourself as a parent. So doing the things, whatever it is, to help you be stable and grounded. It doesn't mean everything's figured out, but you come to this phone call or to the email in a calm state. And so that's really the first main lesson in this course is to work on grounding yourself. So I talk about breathing exercises and meditation and doing the difficult work as a parent to sit with the complexity and not bring your angst to your missionary's life. And because these missionaries, they are adults, and it's a difficult navigation because you are also their parent and they are still learning, and but you have to accept their autonomy and their decisions. And so built into these scripts and this course is teaching parents how to navigate difficult conversations and to explore. We're not trying to cajole or to force a topic. So maybe a missionary will disagree with the topic if that's what their mission is following. But the goal is to have these conversations in a healthy way to say, hey, this is what I'm believing, this is what I'm feeling. I'm curious what your stance is. And I'm not trying to fix your stance. I just want to listen. I want to hear what you're saying and I want to be here for you where you're at. So that's really my goal is just a healthier approach to conversations. And yeah, navigating mission life is very complex, especially for parents who are on a faith expansion journey, who have differing beliefs or expanding beliefs and might not hold to that rigidity of a mission life. And so learning how to navigate that with the tools through this Good Parents Hard Calls course and community, I hope will be very helpful to people.
What I'm hearing is the profound importance of healthy differentiation in these moments of parents having the ability to discern. Like, it feels like you're kind of in some ways walking on a tightrope, and this is one of those moments where I feel like I'm like, a friend of mine wants to ask you this, where, we all know it's like I'm the mom here, right? This is me. But like the tightrope walk of wanting to support the journey of the missionary, and not overextending my own experience into something that is not helpful or healthy to someone else who's having a very different experience, and in some ways a very positive, shaping, like, formative experience, while also as a parent wanting to discern and negotiate subtle, important parenting moments too, to sort of invite increased skill set in dialogue, in having more, like, complex conversations. Because I am of the belief that I think sometimes we, in Mormonism in general, struggle a little bit with having complicated conversations, with negotiating differences of opinion and views and things like that. And so I'm not here to say that should be the theme of every phone call. And I also myself try to negotiate when I just listen and cheerlead and encourage and am so excited. And also every once in a while when I just ask a curious question, right? Just about, like, well, maybe there's other ways to think about that, and just invite and then just discern. Um, what my missionary is able to sort of be curious about and tolerate inside of his own window of tolerance from where he is and his perspective. And it is it's so good for us. It's so good for us to be practicing these skills of because I think like the parent-child attachment is so important, and also the more we can show love and support and healthy connection, the more we can invite differentiated conversations between ourselves. But that's not an easy task. So I'm super excited that you have this resource, and I can't wait to get my hands on it myself. Hopefully, it comes out sooner rather than later, as we're kind of we're at the end part of my son's mission, believe it or not. So, anyways, thank you for that. I think we should pivot. My goodness, this feels like this is a conversation. Maybe it could have been a whole episode. This is just a kind of an opening couple thoughts, but we want to pivot over to one of the lessons that is in uh, Bryson's missionary. Can you remind me of the title of
Yep.
the?
The Mental Health Training Center.
Thank you. The Mental Health Training Center. There are several chapters, and I perused them, and I asked Bryson if we could spend today, the rest of today's episode, focusing on diving a little deeper into OCD and scrupulosity. And one of the reasons why I made this request, I guess, was because I have worked with so many people in my growth and processing healing groups who have struggled quite a bit with OCD scrupulosity, both as missionaries, but also just as individuals who, in a high demand religion, this is, it's definitely a vulnerability. And then I think if you layer on top of that missionary service, it's a high demand um, environment for most, if I'm always kind of a tricky word to say, but a lot of missionaries are in high demand situations. And therefore, this is an added vulnerability. And so, not only did we want to touch on this for the topic itself, but I really wanted Bryson to kind of walk us through what you might expect as far as the flow of every chapter of this resource that he offers to us. So, I think I might just ask a few questions here and there, but more so than anything, I would really love it, Bryson, if you would just kind of walk us through what, like, the arc of what a chapter looks like by giving us the arc of this particular chapter on OCD and scrupulosity and how you treat this for the missionary that is going through this. I guess I'll just throw out a first question. I think this is something that can be part of their preparatory work as a missionary, but something they can also access later.
Exactly, yeah. So the goal is to expose them to the material for them to go through the course before their mission. And then they'll have access to it on their mission, ideally to, yeah, have those resources to use. And so, yeah, my intent with creating the Mental Health Training Center was really to first help missionaries recognize the mental health, recognize it in themselves, recognize it in others, because it's hard to recognize what's going on if you don't have a name for it. And so the goal, especially with OCD and scrupulosity, is give it a name. There's power in names, and just able to label it like this, what this is going on, and help preparing missionaries just see the signs and symptoms. And that way, if they do develop it on their mission, they'll be able to say, oh, I listened to this a couple of years ago, and I think this is what's going on. I need some help, or I
Yeah.
can do this. I have the tools that I learned in the course.
Okay, so great. So love that. I think I want to back us up just a tiny bit though, because it kind of occurred to me that before we jump into that, I think I actually led you a little bit astray there by asking a question before maybe giving a little bit of a sense of what you can expect as a listener, as a parent, or as a missionary preparing. So when Bryson gave me access to his website, I kind of cruised through like all of the topics, and then I would click on once I was in, the missionary, the mental health training center for our purposes today. I clicked on, I think it was chapter 11, and there's a video that is fantastic. It's engaging, it's fun to watch, and it walks through the entirety of each topic. And before we you jump into the content itself of the chapter, maybe walk everybody through when they click on that video, give everyone a little bit of a sense of how you open each and every video to kind of contextualize or kind of it's I loved it because in some ways I knew what to expect as I opened each video, and it kind of creates a cohesive whole of the entirety of your curriculum. So start us at just minute one of that video before we jump into the new content.
Yeah, as I created the course, I was very intentional. I understand that these are 17, 18-year-old learners, first of all. So short attention span, and also these are difficult topics. And all learners learn differently. So I have some visual aspect to the course. I have some auditory. I even have some kinesthetic. I incorporate mindfulness. And so it is actually highly structured. Each chapter or section is patterned the same. So you know what to expect. So help with that consistency, especially for those anxious individuals who are struggle with inconsistency. But on the flip side, there's a lot of structure, but there's also some variability to help different learners. And so I try to incorporate. So in every lesson, I try to encourage individuals who are more kinesthetic to get up and to do a breathing exercise or mindfulness. So every lesson, at the very beginning, I have what I call a micro win, or a little small win that you can do each day that helps with your mental health. So primarily those looks like breathing exercises or mindfulness or meditations or visualizations. So I'm modeling missionaries how they can be mindful and how they can navigate these tools in a healthy way. So we practice it together. So that's the beginning of every lesson. And then I have what I call a missionary moment. And so I take a scriptural principle, a story, and tie it to mental health. Like I said last time, spirituality and psychology, spirituality, they're all one great whole, so to speak. They're very interlinked. And so I love tying the scriptures to mental health. So I give an example in one of the lecture or lessons where Jesus goes out to be alone. And Jesus takes time to be mindful and to be still. And so I highlight different principles from the scriptures of where a healthy mental health tool or technique or message that I want missionaries to know for themselves, but then they can also teach it to their investigators as well. And then after, so our micro win and our missionary moment, then I dive into the core topic. So in this case, it's scrupulosity. And so I go through the lesson material. I have a halfway break where I encourage them to pause, to get a drink, go to the bathroom. I don't want them to plow through. I want them to digest this information. And so we go through the material, and then I try to teach 3 high yield tools that they can take with them on their mission. And so I try to lean on the air of practicality. I know these are 18, 19-year-old individuals, so I want it to be clear, I want it to be concise, and this is what you can do in the moment. And then each lesson has a workbook. And so whether it's a reading material or questions or like the workout routine or the cookbook, just things they can take with them on the mission that pertains to the topic. And then I kind of have a summary, closing, and an assignment. Because mental health, you have to apply. And so each assignment I give, and it can range from doing a breathing exercise to, in particular in this lesson, to teach another about scrupulosity. So teach what they've learned to someone else. So this is twofold. They're internalizing the material for themselves, and then they're practicing teaching because that's what they'll be doing for their entire mission. So that's the high yield structure before we dive into the topic of scrupulosity today.
Oh, I love it. I love it so much. I really, as I went through this curriculum myself, it resonated with me that I knew, like by the second or third chapter, I was like, oh, okay, I get it. I get it. We open with a meditation. There's the win. I loved how you incorporated in your scripture application. I'm sorry, I don't have all the correct names, but you took some kind of old faithful scripture stories, but you incorporate it into mental health principles that in some ways might create a bridge of comfort to some missionaries that might feel a little bit weird or uncomfortable with some of these topics that aren't necessarily, sometimes there's a little bit of taboo or discomfort around issues around mental health. And so to bridge, oh, I get Jesus, going to be alone and praying. Okay, that's the same as meditation. Maybe that isn't as weird as I thought it was, right? And so, love how you're meeting them where they are in that. And then, what I also loved, and this is my way to kind of pivot us towards this core topic, is you opened this chapter by being very vulnerable and helping missionaries see that I'm over here, I'm preparing to be a doctor, I'm a return missionary, probably a pretty accomplished guy to some of these young sister and elder missionaries. And yet you were able to share with them that I get this, not because I'm well educated and am just telling you, but I get this because this happened to me. And so maybe if you would, let's share with our audience what your own story was about how you also struggled with some OCD scrupulosity on your mission.
Yeah, so in the course, I start with a story. I'm a huge supporter of vulnerability. Like vulnerability begets vulnerability and it helps people heal. So these fake facades and putting your best face forward, there's a place for that. But I truly believe as a community, being honest and being vulnerable, especially about mental health, is very healing and very supportive. And so I wanted to model that in this lesson. So I share a story on my mission. I was probably 12, 13, 14 months into my mission. So I was more than halfway through, and I served in Africa on the west side. And we get these winds from the Sahara Desert blowing these very fine particles of sand. And so it was in the middle of the night, and the fire alarm went off. And so woke me and my companion up, and we checked the fire alarm, and there was no fires going on. It stopped, so we went back to bed. About 30 minutes later, it went off again. So we got up, looked again, false alarm. So we went back to bed. 45 minutes later, it went off again. And at this point, I was just annoyed. And this wasn't the first time it had happened with those fine particles of sand. Like I mentioned, these smoke detectors kind of detected it as smoke, even though it was just sand. And so at this point, frustrated, I took the fire alarm off the wall, but it was one of those where the battery was fused to it, so you couldn't take it off. And so I'm like, well, I don't want to destroy property. I'll just leave it there and go back to bed. Half hour later, alarm goes off again. And so finally, I took the alarm, wrapped it in a towel. I put it in the washing machine and closed the door. And I went and got some earplugs that I kept, and I went back to bed. So this is probably several hours in the middle of the night of interruptions. Fast forward to the morning, I woke up and I looked at my alarm and it's 7:45. I double checked. I'm like, it's 7:45. It's not 6:30. Oh no, I'm a horrible sinner. And my first thought was like, uh-oh, I sinned. I need to repent. So I got on my knees and I asked for forgiveness for sleeping in. And then all these thoughts are racing through my mind that, oh, I wasn't exactly obedient to the 6:30 a.m. rule. I had kept this rule up for over a year, which I think contributes to my reaction, is because it's a much bigger deal. Is I broke a rule. If I broke a rule, I won't receive the miracles because obedience brings blessings. Exact obedience brings miracles, that internalized message that you get on the mission. And so I was running through this whole thing, like, since I won't get the miracles, I'll have trouble teaching, have trouble finding people to baptize, and I won't be able to save anyone. So it's like this escalating catastrophe of thoughts that are going through my mind, in my 19 or 20-year-old mind, from this one event when I was up all night from a fire alarm. And I wanted to emphasize, and I show this in the course, that this isn't healthy thinking. I want to weep for this young 20-year-old self who felt like they were a bad person because they were up all night and slept in past their 6:30 a.m. I want to weep for this young missionary who felt like a sinner or felt like they were a failure because they didn't exactly obey the mission rule. And that really is kind of what scrupulosity is. It's this intense moral obligation that you have to do everything right. And if you don't, you'll be punished for it. And so that is the example I share about scrupulosity or a scrupulous experience. And it was I wouldn't, looking back, I wouldn't diagnose myself with scrupulosity, but this was an experience where I experienced scrupulous behavior. And so I also want to normalize that even if you are going through experiences and you can have these patterns emerge, it might not be diagnosable, but it's not healthy either.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and so relatable. As I was thinking about this and preparing for our time together, it occurred to me that I 100% had struggles myself with scrupulous behavior as a missionary. And I think that's why I wanted to touch into this, because for you out there, parents and loved ones, some of you may be, very, very knowledgeable about this, because this may be your own story or the story of someone you love, OCD in general, or perhaps the scrupulosity that we're discussing right now. But I also think it's worth talking about, or at least highlighting, that there are certain environments that bring this up, even in someone who doesn't necessarily have a predisposition towards OCD or this variation of anxiety. And this is an environment that does this, I think, or at least can do this. I don't want to ever generalize that it will always happen, but it can happen. And you mentioned this also in your curriculum, that when someone is struggling with something like this and they try to put language to it, sometimes the very behaviors that they're experiencing that are a manifestation of anxiety are actually rewarded, reinforced, and sometimes these very kinds of things are considered like the height of spirituality or like, oh, goodness. And I mean, I've noticed a few times in talking to those near and dear to me that are missionaries, that sometimes the most anxious and even vigilant or even hyper vigilant missionaries are the very same ones that continue to get promoted in their priesthood leadership as missionaries. And I don't think this is an outlying situation. And so I really kind of love that this topic is in your curriculum, because and I think it's tricky too, Bryson, because like, it's not to say that we don't want to be diligent. We don't want to, there's like a normal range of what humans, missionaries included, are, as we strive to do our best and um, to show up for something we've committed to, like, what a missionary, you committed to be a missionary. So what does that mean? But I also think that we're talking about like ranges of normal, and when we have moved beyond a range of normal. And I think that there are a lot of missionaries that quite quickly perhaps are vulnerable to moving beyond the range of normal because it's not known what's going on. And sometimes the lack of education is made infinitely worse by it being reinforced.
Yes, and I firmly believe that as well. It's hard to put a name to it, especially as an 18, 19-year-old who's never experienced it before, or even if they have experienced it before. Yeah, it's hard to give a name to it. And so, yeah, that it's difficult to scale what's normal, what is abnormal, what's healthy, what's not healthy. And learning how to navigate that is super challenging. And so the goal, with this lesson on scrupulosity is to just help put a name to it, help missionaries recognize it, and say, hey, maybe I had some scrupulous behavior today, but that doesn't mean I'm impaired. And so I have a whole section on talking about at what point is it impairing? At what point does it cross that threshold into normal to abnormal, healthy to unhealthy? And so, especially with scrupulosity, the challenge, especially on missions, is scrupulosity looks like strong faith on the outside. But where it goes into that level of unhealthy is internally, it feels like fear, it feels like pressure, and it feels like never being okay. And so I think that's where we start to go into that realm of unhealthy, because a lot of missionaries do show up. Like, I enjoyed obeying the mission rules and waking up early and having this structure that helped me grow. But when it goes into that point where you internalize that you are bad, if you leave your apartment 2 minutes late, or it starts impacting your relationships with your companions because they're 2 minutes late and you're a little more scrupulous, And you're like, hey, we have to leave if we want to get the blessings. And so it starts negatively impacting your companionships. And so, yeah, navigating that realm of is it healthy, is it not, can be very challenging.
A couple things that come up for me as I'm listening is number one, just that measuring what am I feeling? And if I am being guided by love and excitement and compassion for the chance I have to go out and, share God's love with the world, that's one thing. But if I'm being guided or directed and my body is experiencing high degrees or even medium degrees of fear, of anxiety, of the sense that there is a leader or a God that is watching over me and that every single step or every single thought or every single uh, action is being monitored for worthiness and for reward or punishment. I think that is that there's a big clearly there's a big difference, but I do not think a lot of missionaries or even missionary parents have the language for that. And that takes me to the second thought I had about what we're talking about here, which is how wonderful will it be when not only does a missionary have a little bit of a sense of what this is, because maybe just one time she hears this in her, pre-mission training center, mental health training center, and so she might just kind of put it away and just have it there. But also, what if in those weekly phone calls, a parent has this education and starts sort of like sniffing out something that starts to really seem like scrupulosity. And because both of them have an education around this is where the parent can intervene in a way that maybe in a mission culture that doesn't have this education and might even inadvertently reinforce it, that parents can step in and go, hey, listen, I know you're trying to do your best and try your hardest, but I think I'm thinking about that, chapter in the mental health training center, and I'm wondering if what's happening is in your desires to be the best that you can, maybe what we're entering into a realm of some scrupulosity, and it's like it becomes a bridge to connect as a parent and help meet the need of a missionary if those needs are not being recognized, much less met amongst their peers or their leadership in the mission field. I hope it is. I really hope it extends that far. But in the event that it isn't, we as parents can be that stabilizing factor that helps a missionary if they get sort of lost in the culture of high demand that reinforces scrupulosity. I can't overemphasize how I think important this is for the parent to also have this information.
Yeah, as I designed the course, I thought of the parents. Like, I'm a firm believer. In an ideal world, I love the parent and the preparing missionary to watch it together. And throughout the course, I actually encourage the preparing missionary to find an accountability partner. So, what I call an AP. So, on your mission, you have the AP who kind of oversees the logistics and things. And so they're creating an accountability partner or finding one in the first lesson or first assignment. And then they go back to this accountability partner, they teach, they ask questions, they collaborate, and it start to help the preparing missionary learn how to have a conversation about mental health in a healthy way. And so I would love it if a parent is one of these accountability partners and they can be each other's accountability partner. And so they learn the material together. It starts the conversation. They, like, for example, in lesson one about stress, they can create a list of like, what are your stressors? What are your triggers? And what can we do to mitigate those on your mission? What tools can we provide you, for example? And have that conversation from the get-go. And then on their mission, yeah, have those touch points, those conversations that you can refer back to. Like, hey, your last email, it seems like you're having an amazing time. Just what you said made me think about this lesson, and I just wanted to check in. Do you feel like you're in a healthy place right now? Or do you feel like you're kind of bordering on the edge where you're kind of being consumed by this rigidity or something like that? So, given the
Yeah.
language for parent and child is, I think, one of the best aspects of these resources.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It just is so good for like all the parties involved. So I want to circle us back, if I may. Big picture, within this lesson, they open up, you do these breathing exercises, you do the missionary moment, and then you share your own story to kind of introduce the concept in general to sort of normalize that, like, it's okay. It even happened to me, right? And then you move into to a couple of other little sections that I would love for you to kind of walk everyone through. After you do your personal story to introduce the idea, you do some defining of some really important concepts, and then you offer three on the ground tools that will help missionaries if they feel like they are, in fact, struggling with scrupulosity. Would you go ahead and just walk us through, just generally, what these three terms are that you share in your curriculum to sort of help missionaries and their parents understand this better conceptually, and then move over to giving us a bit of an overview of what the three tools are?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm a big fan of education, psychoeducation in an appropriate level. So I don't want to overwhelm these missionaries. This isn't a college level course, it's an introductory course to giving missionaries language. So I try to be simple, intentional. So to understand scrupulosity, we first have to understand OCD, because that's really what we're talking about. So let's break down the O, the C, and the D. So the O is obsessive. So obsessiveness is, or obsessions are unwanted, intrusive thoughts. So these can also be unwanted, intrusive feelings or doubts. So in the course, I go through some examples of kind of intrusive thoughts. We all have them. For example, you're going on a hike and you're looking over this beautiful mountain and you're just enjoying the moment. And then all of a sudden you have this thought of like, what if I jumped? And then you visualize yourself falling and then your bones crash into the floor and you wince. You're like, why did I even think about that? And you move on. So that is an intrusive thought. We all have intrusive thoughts about a variety of topics. And it's normal. It happens every day. And it's just our brain of processing things in its own unique way. But obsessions is when it becomes unwanted and intrusive and overwhelming. It comes back over and over again. Compulsions are things you do to feel better about these unwanted, obsessional, intrusive thoughts. So the compulsions are things to help make these intrusive obsessions go away. For example, I once had a patient who had this obsession or worry that their house was not locked when they left work. So, a lot of worry, they locked the door, they started driving to work. Then they had this intrusive obsession or thought that, uh-oh, what if it didn't lock properly? The compulsion was they turned around on the freeway, drove back to their house, and checked it again. And then they'd go back on the freeway, and then they had this intrusive thought again, like, oh, I did double check it, but what if it wasn't completely locked? So they turn around again and do it over and over again. So this is an example of kind of a lock checking OCD. There's lots of different types of OCD. There's sexual OCD. There's like violent OCD. So you imagine yourself. I also had a patient. He was a basketball player who had these intrusive thoughts about stabbing himself every time he went to do a free throw. And obviously, it was impairing to his free throw and impairing to himself. But then his compulsion was to seek reassurance. And so he'd ask people, am I a good person? I'm not, do I hurt people? And so he'd seek, his compulsion was to ask for reassurance, which is a common one, especially in scrupulosity. And so this is a vicious cycle of OCD. So you have these intrusive thoughts that overwhelm you. And this is where it goes into that realm of unhealthiness. We all have intrusive thoughts, but when it becomes over and over and over again, and then you're compelled to do something about it, that's where it goes into the realm of unhealthy. So this vicious loop, a thought pops in, it creates the anxiety, you do something to fix it, it works briefly, the thought pops in, and then the cycle goes over and over and over again. It's incredibly impairing and incredibly exhausting. So let's turn that now to scrupulosity. So the root of scrupulous is a sharp stone or pebble. So Latin for that. So imagine you're walking and you have the sharp pebble in your shoe every time you step, and it's pushing on you. It's intrusive, it's impairing, you're thinking about it all the time. And I love that root word because it's really visual. Like when I go on walks and get a shoe in my, like I have to stop. I take it out, I put my shoe back on, but imagine that pebble every time you take a step popping back in your shoe. And that's how impairing OCD can be. And so I normalize that this is a disorder of doubt that can significantly impair you. And it's hard to live with. And so giving yourself compassion when these come up. So that's kind of how I set the stage for OCD in this lesson. And then I dive into what scrupulosity means. And so I give a quote from Taylor Kirby's book, Scrupulous. And Taylor Kirby, actually, you interviewed in episode 231 and 232. So he's a Latter-day Saint who experienced scrupulosity and wrote an excellent book about it. So I would refer your listeners to those two lessons or two sessions, 231, 232. He dives a lot more into scrupulosity in general, whereas we're focusing in the mission age population. So here's a quote from him. Picture a moment, that reductive stereotype of a person with OCD agonizing over some picture frames just out of alignment. Now, with scrupulosity, apply that same fervor to one's relationship to one's moral character. Imagine that constant and obsessive nagging, questions about whether you are good enough, loved by God enough, worthy enough, and you begin to get a sense of scrupulosity. So I think that's a very powerful quote. Just to see relating that from OCD, the lock checking, the cleanliness, but then tie that to moral rectitude, which moral rectitude includes moral integrity or righteousness or being corrected in judgment and procedure. So the question is, what does that look like? What does scrupulosity look like on a mission? And so I go through that. So first I break it down to the obsessions. So some missionaries experience fear of sinning unintentionally. So they worry that they sinned, they said something wrong, and it's just obsessional fear. Or you fear eternal consequences. If I don't invite this person to be baptized, I'm going to be damned. And you worry for your salvation. So it could be doubting intentions. Like, I have good intentions to help this investigator friend, but did I do enough? It also includes intrusive or blasphemous thoughts. So Taylor talks about this, how he experienced some sexual OCD thoughts, these intrusive, unwanted thoughts. So this could look like for missionaries having this intrusive thought about raping investigator friend or a companion. It's unwanted. It's incredibly painful for them, but it's there and it comes back over and over again. Or this hyper focus on right versus wrong. So this obsession of rigidity, like you're leaving 1 minute late, we have to leave 60 seconds earlier. This very black and white rigid thinking. So those are obsessions, examples that missionaries might experience. And then we dive into the compulsions. So for a missionary, compulsions can look like a variety of things. So one is repeating prayers over and over again until they're perfect. So it looks like you're praying for hours at night, or even 10, 15 minutes. So long enough so your companion might think, oh, he or she is very righteous. But in reality, you're trying to say the perfect prayer because you messed up once, so you have to restart over and over again. So another common one is over confessing. And so you see this with bishops outside the mission field, but also on the mission field with mission leadership. And so this is the missionary who's calling over and over again every time they have an intrusive thought or every time they leave the house a minute early. So this is when it gets on the mission president's radar. They're like, okay, stop calling me. Like, you left a minute late. It's totally fine. But they need this reassurance over and over again. And that feeds into the loop because a lot of mission presidents or a missionary will come saying, hey, I studied for like they say they're doing all the right things. And then the mission president sees the externalness of it and is like, wow, you're doing an amazing job. And that reinforces the cycle. And then it also can look like avoidance. So you start avoiding talking to your parents. You start avoiding your mission leadership. because you don't want them to see what's going on. You don't want to see that you're such a sinner. And so this is where missionaries tend to shut down. And this is when it kind of gets on the radar of parents. And then also overanalyzing past actions. So missionaries replay the lessons over and over in their head, and it impairs them because they're like, what if I said it this way? Maybe they would have been baptized had I said it like this perfectly. And so just going through these, once again, I want to emphasize sometimes this looks like strong faith on the outside, this external rigidity of doing all the right things, but you're kind of doing them for the wrong reasons. You're internally feeling the pressure, the fear, and the never enoughness. And that is what's very impairing. So that's kind of how I break down teaching a principle, just modeling that.
Yeah.
And then going into, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll pause you just a little bit just to comment on a couple things that I was thinking about as I was listening. It just feels so clear to me why this particular manifestation of anxiety will sometimes come up in a full-time mission. And it also occurred to me as I was listening to you mention those statistics from your surveys that I would bet that the 14% number is probably low. Just because I think there is probably a range and many missionaries that wouldn't necessarily be suffering in a way that is sort of a diagnosable OCD scrupulosity kind of way, probably are feeling a heightened degree of scrupulosity just by being in a full-time mission. And the reason why I say that is because there is, every mission is going to be different. Um, and also having said that, we're a good generation, different between myself and my husband, where we served and our son. And some of the language has not in fact changed, right? Like the exact obedience, the blessings associated with hard work and compliance. In some ways, it's the transactional nature. And on the side of compassion for a mission president, I get it, right? Like they're managing 200-ish missionaries. So of course they're trying to sort of impress upon these missionaries over whom they cannot be supervising all the time, like an internal compass. And of course, the problematic side of it is it is a fear base as opposed to a love base. And this is a young population to be unsupervised. While also, what I notice is that OCD scrupulosity in and of itself is almost like the creation of an internal transaction that loops. So the idea of a transactional relationship outside becomes a transactional relationship inside with the obsession and then the compulsion. The problem is, as we all know, it loops. You get relief for only just so long, and then it starts over and over and over and over. And I'm really grateful for the way you talk about this to help define it and help the missionary and their parents have language to see something that is very, very poorly understood so that they don't suffer, because this is a profoundly painful experience when one feels as if they are a prisoner of their own mind, and it costs people extreme sleep, appetite, the ability to function, the ability to experience a mission in a way that it really can potentially be if one has an understanding of some of these things that can happen and they are able to see it for what it is, so that they do not become sort of held hostage by it. So with that, I guess I wonder if could you give a little bit of an overview of the three tools that you share with the missionaries that are sort of very, very practical of how they can address this issue once they have an understanding of what is going on.
Yeah, so I err on the side of practicality, like I said, and also research-backed tools. So I really want to emphasize the importance. Like these are tools that have good science behind them. They have good data behind them. Because not to diminish the tools offered in a mission, because we all have our toolbox. And on a mission, a lot of the toolbox for the mission president is, well, how about you pray harder, or you fast, or you reach out to your companions. So those are excellent tools. I don't want to diminish those. But for religious OCD, praying harder is not an appropriate tool. And so I cover 3 tools to help with OCD or scrupulous tendencies. So the first one is thought labeling and reframing. So there's just great power in being able to say, hey, this is a thought. I am not my thought. And to separate yourself between thoughts and your internal being is a skill that seems intuitive, but often, especially for the young, it isn't. And so missionaries need to learn that just because they have a thought, it doesn't mean it's who they are. It doesn't mean they're a bad person. It doesn't, they're neutral. Like thoughts are net neutral. And so in this tool, thought labeling is giving them scripts and language to say that. And so they're tracting and they have this intrusive thought that if they don't invite the next person to be baptized, they're a sinner. So thought labeling would be to say, hey, this is an intrusive thought. It's simple as that. Or you could even go on to say, hey, this is a scrupulous thought. Or let's say a missionary is walking down the road and they have a sexual thought, like everyone does. Rather than say, I'm a bad person, I'm a bad missionary, they can just say, this is a sexual thought, this is normal, and move on. And so just this is a powerful tool. It seems simple, but just labeling thoughts. So name it to tame it is what I like to say. So you name it and it helps decrease the intensity. The problem with OCD and scrupulosity is you feed the beast and it is a monster. I've had patients tell me that it's overwhelming. It's all encompassing. And just having the language to name it is a powerful first step. So practical tool number 1. So tool number 2 is challenge perfectionism. So throughout the course, I do a lot of CBT or cognitive behavioral training, and so help missionaries learn how to recognize thoughts, respond to them in healthier ways. And so this is similar to thought labeling, but specifically to perfectionism. And perfectionism feeds the loop of OCD and scrupulosity. So I have to be perfect. I have to be morally perfect, morally right. And so challenging perfectionism, you can do in a wide variety of ways. You first recognize it, but then you give yourself permission not to be perfect. So say, this is where that exposure response prevention comes in. So you expose yourself, so you intentionally leave 1 minute late from lunch. You intentionally don't iron your shirt. You give yourself permission not to be perfect. This might seem like wild advice from a mission president's perspective, because like you mentioned, like mission presidents like people who fall in line and they say something and you say yes sir and move on. Like it makes for a good missionary. But this tool is really for people with the scrupulous behavior. And so I don't encourage everyone just to stop ironing their shirts every day, but it's give yourself permission not to be perfect and to intentionally mess up and have a beautiful oops, as I tell my 6-year-old. And just doing that takes a huge burden off of people. For example, with my story with sleeping in with the fire alarm, had I just said, okay, I'm going to sleep in until 6:35 tomorrow, it's going to be fine. Just giving myself permission once in a while to do something, to not be perfect, is healing, especially for those who have high anxiety and scrupulous tendencies. And then lastly is tool number 3, know when to seek help. I really emphasize this in the lessons on depression, anxiety, and OCD, because at some point you can't manage the symptoms on your own. And so you need to seek help for healthy living. And so I go through what I call the key indicators. So on a mission, you have key indicators of baptism, of teaching, and things. So these are the key indicators of when you need mental health. So I go through some of those. So sometimes it's the persistence. So you can have an intrusive thought, but is it persistent over weeks or months? And then is it impairing? So are you struggling to get up? Are you struggling to communicate? Are you struggling to go out and talk to people? So that persistence. And then, so consistence, persistence. And then I give a couple other tools of who do you reach out to? And so typically it starts with your parents and your mission leaders, and then it escalates from there. So I also give some missionaries some language around if they're not being heard by a mission leader to be able to say, hey, I'm not okay. I need some additional help or support. So to teach advocacy, to help missionaries advocate for themselves.
Wow. Wow. I'm just overwhelmed with gratitude for the felt call that you have answered, and for the missionaries. There's going to be so many missionaries that are going to have a different experience than they otherwise would have had without this resource. And so I cannot be more grateful to you, Bryson, for what you're offering. The big question now as we close today is how can families of missionaries, or oh gosh, how would I love if mission presidents could get their hands on this and use this as part of their training? Church leaders, mission prep leaders, like how can anyone who is interested not only get this for themselves, but spread the word on what this resource is that you're offering, that I really do hope, I'm having a funny moment of like was it Benson who like talked about filling the world with the Book of Mormon? I'm feeling like we need to fill the world with this missionary guide, this mental health training center for the good of all the missionaries that want to serve a full-time mission, to set them up to not just succeed in terms of like baptisms. I'm not thinking about that today. What I'm thinking about is setting them up to have a successful, formative experience in their life that will help them live mentally healthy, thriving lives, not just in the mission, but thereafter. So close us up, if you would, by helping everybody know where they can go to find these resources.
Yeah, that's my goal. We talk about having an army of missionaries. I would love it if these 18, 19-year-old missionaries can, over the course of their mission, develop mental health tools that will set them up for success for generations to come. Like their lives will be incredibly better, their children's lives. Like I feel like investing in mental health as a young adult, as a preparing current missionary, will pay dividends for years down the road. So I'm passionate about this topic about mental health and helping missionaries. And so if you want to find where you can find the mental health training center, the good parents hard calls, the sign up for the weekly emails, etc., is www.latterdaymissionaries.com. So at that website, you can find a lot of resources. I also have an Instagram account called All Thy Mind. So serve God with all thy heart, all thy mind. So focusing on the mental health aspect. So if you want to follow, I teach practical tools and tips and reels and stuff there as well.
Wow. I'll make sure that's linked in the show notes of both of these episodes of this series. And just um, a closing thank you, Bryson, for what you're doing, for how you're serving our community. What you're doing is invaluable. So I thank you.
Yep, and thank you. And one last thing I wanted to mention, this is broad general information. If you feel like you or your missionary is really struggling, I do encourage to seek professional help. And in the LDS sphere, there is a business called Mountain Home Center for Religious and Moral OCD. I talked to one of the therapist there, Claire Breedlove, yesterday, and very impressed with this resource. So I just wanted to mention that for any of those who like want to work with a therapist who specializes in scrupulosity in the LDS population. So that's just mountainhomeocd.com. So that's just another resource as parents and missionaries can have.
I'm really grateful that you brought this up, and may I add my own endorsement to what he just said. Not because I am familiar with that specific organization, but I will say as a mental health worker that OCD is its own diagnosis that has a very, very specific treatment protocol. So in other words, if your missionary is struggling with this and the mission wants to send them to their like local mission assigned mental health worker, that may or may not be sufficient. You really do need to ask the question if they have specific training in OCD and or OCD scrupulosity, because it has its own treatment protocol, and a different kind of therapist that may do a wonderful job in many other aspects of struggles in missionaries may not know how to treat this. So this, I think, is a this is a big deal because it is quite it's a specific way to help someone with a thought disorder. So anything you want to add to that?
Yep,
Bryson?
I totally agree. Yeah, it's a very niche.
Yes.
Mental health is pretty broad. It's very specific, and not all therapists, not all psychiatrists have a lot of training in it. Yeah, so this I talked to Claire yesterday about it, and she works with missionaries who are currently out struggling with OCD, and so it's a great resource. Yeah, mountainhomeocd.com for specifically the LDS population struggling with scrupulosity.
Fantastic. I know for a fact, that there are going to be parents out there that are jotting that down because like I had mentioned before, I have received many a communication from a missionaries' parents, not only just saying thank you for the Latter-day Struggles podcast, but wanting specific resources to help a struggling missionary. And so God bless you for ending our episode with on the ground resources of what we can do to help our children. So thank you again, Bryson. Thank you all so much for listening and supporting psychologically, spiritually healthy content here through the Latter-day Struggles podcast. And we will see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Latter-day Struggles. If this podcast has supported your faith journey, we invite you to explore the many ways you can continue your healing and growth with us. On our website, you'll find support and processing groups, marriage and parenting courses, and free resources to support where you are in your faith journey. You can also join Valerie in the live fellowship gatherings throughout the year, where we connect, process the podcast, and build meaningful friendships with others on similar paths. If cost has ever been a barrier, we offer podcast scholarships funded by listener donations. To explore all of these offerings, visit the link in today's show notes or go to latterdaystruggles.com. And if this podcast has been meaningful to you, leaving a 5-star review is one of the most powerful ways to help others find this work. Latter-day Struggles is proud to be part of the Dialogue Podcast Network.
Dialogue Podcast Network.